Welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about a land dispute that involves your PC. We're going to be talking about places of need, and we're going to finish off today with an unlucky captain, all that and more here on Rise of the GM today. Well, hey, Adam, here we are again. It is,
Hey.
What are we? We're in the middle of January.
Yeah.
On our, I think, 65th
65th
if anybody's
episode.
keeping track. I don't know what that means, but there we are.
It's good stuff.
And we're going to be jumping into a whole new series called Place here in the next few weeks. And we're starting today with Places of Need. That's going to be interesting. Some people are like, what in the world does that even mean? We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But we're going to start as we often do. But first, how are things in your neck of the woods there in Terre Haute today?
Doing okay. Was paying attention. It looks like all the ice is melting off out here. It's warm enough, so that's been good.
It's supposed
Get
to
a
get
little
up to
sun.
like 40 here tomorrow. I don't know
nice.
about there. I imagine it's about the same. But and then Saturday, still warm in the morning, but then decreasing temperatures as we head toward evening. I only hope that rain moves all the ice and stuff that's around, gets it out of here, and then gets away so that it's not frozen.
Yeah.
As somebody who has to take care of all the plowing of lots,
right?
Work and stuff. I don't actually plow it, but I have to talk to the people who do. I just don't want that to be a thing of need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's time. I was telling you, off before we started. I'm feeling a little nervous right now because this is a close to the end of the game campaign for us tonight.
And
maybe the end.
We play. We are
at least part of the end.
We're there.
maybe like 1 through 5 of the 7 endings may happen tonight. So
1 through 5. I love those 5. Those last 2. Oh my goodness, those are great also.
Or we'll be in the middle of a battle by the end of the night. I don't know. So
and if you don't know what the 7 endings are, we have an episode that talks about how to end well. I don't remember what the title is, but
I made a joke during. So I made a joke during that, and I'm like, I'm doing doing research right now, as we're talking to get ready for this. And I went back this week and re-listened to that part of the podcast because I'm like, I need to remember that and refresh myself. So I do have a list of all of them here. So
good for you guys to know. Hey, when you get to certain parts in your game and you remember there was an episode, they're titled. You can go back and find it pretty easily in our catalog and listen to that episode again. Be ready for it. One other thing of note that I feel like is necessary for me to throw out: my kids started their weekly D&D campaign this week.
Oh, yeah.
So they are in a campaign at the Sullivan Library with other kids. A librarian there who is a D&D nerd is running the game. His friend helps him. They have this table full of kids, 5 or 6 kids. And my kids were so stinking excited. I got them each set up on their own D&D Beyond on that, which, by the way, I want to throw a gripe out to Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and how much I hate you. I just realized for the first time that you can no longer buy things a la carte in D&D. You can't buy Owlin Race by itself. You have to buy the $29 book and 99 cents, the $30 book just to get the Owlin Race. And my son had already created it on my iPad before and wanted it. And so I had to spend stinking $30. And he also wanted the Way of the Long Death for the monk, but that's in a separate book. And I told him, son, that's it. You just can't have Long Death. You're going to be Way of the Cobalt Soul because that's the free one. The stupid D&D Beyond allows you to have this whole not allowing people to buy anything a la carte. If you want just a feat, if you want just a race, if you want just an item, they now force you. And this has been like 8 months, and I didn't even know because I bought the stuff I wanted before. I guess it was around May that it happened, and I am so stinking upset with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. And so when we did a podcast. Maybe Adam and Josh did it. I wasn't there. They were talking about what do you like to run. I am revising my thoughts on that, which I didn't even get to say on air. But I'm changing it. It's not 5e anymore because I can't let people have more than a base character where they can express themselves without them spending $60, $120, $180 to get the pieces they want to make a good character. This is why I love Pathfinder. I can tell them, and I'm talking Pathfinder 1. I don't know if Pathfinder 2 is charging stuff now, but like these greedy companies that make it so that you cannot You cannot just get the little pieces here and there from third party or from them or whatever. That's why I love the SRD. I love that everything online is free with Pathfinder. And so I'm going to stick with Pathfinder till the end of time, because this always happens with Wizards of the Coast with their D&D stuff. Every single time I get thinking, hey, they've got a pretty good system here. For $1.99, I can buy the little pieces I need here and there and do that. And then they do this. And it just shows once again their their money grab all the time. Hate it. So as much as I love the ease of D&D 5e, you just lost me as a sponsor, which we don't care about one bit, but you just lost me as a user for the games I run. I'm still using it right now because we're in a game and I have bought the little pieces I need, but it just irks me to no end that now it's $30 if you want anything out of the base, ordinary, standard, stupid classes that they give you in the core. Yeah. Okay, that's my little spiel, my little rant on Wizards and Hasbro and whoever made that decision. I hope you hear this. I hope enough people, and I've seen a lot of them in this last week as I've been trying to build that, and I go on to all these Reddits and stuff like that. They're all like, I'm done with 5e, I'm going back to Pathfinder. And I'm like, amen, brother. I hope enough people do that. And I'm just going to encourage all of you listening, go back to Pathfinder. Let's just put it to the man. Show him, if you really want us, get off our wallets. All right. So, or we'll get on yours. We'll stop paying for anything. Rob Henry tells me, welcome to 2024, Matthew. I can't handle it. This is my problem. Back when we first went to Netflix and we're like, you know what? We're cutting the cable. We're not doing cable anymore. We can watch what, it was great. You get 2 discs a month and you get to stream. Everything was on Netflix. And then, Netflix doesn't have the Disney stuff because Disney pulled theirs off. Oh, and then now Peacock does. Now Paramount does. Now AMC does. Now this does. Now that does. Now you have 14 different subscriptions that cost as much as cable, and I'm like sick of it, and I rebel against everything, and I'm a crotchety old man. I agree, Rob Henry. I'm a crotchety old man who doesn't like or get 2024 and beyond, and this whole subscription and make me pay for everything. This is why I loved buying books. Once you bought I sat here talking about how I don't want to buy the whole book. I don't know what I'm saying, but people know that I'm a crotchety old man who likes to rant. All right, with all that out of the way, my kids are in a D&D game, and except for the Way of the Long Death, my son's pretty happy with his character.
Very cool, very cool.
They are now weekly in a game, and my son made the comment, Dad, I love so much that now I don't have to wait for you to want to play with me. I can just play every week with you. I'm like, yes, it's true. There was a lot more asking to play than I actually indulged in. So I'm super happy that he has a weekly, and my daughter's in it too, and she likes it, which... I was a little worried how that would go. She loves it. It's going to be a good time.
That's cool. That's really cool.
D&D family that plays together stays together. Anyway, that doesn't mean anything. All right, Chris. Adam. I don't know why I said Chris. Adam, let's move on to our encounter of the day. We always give you guys an encounter. If you're a GM and you're just looking for an idea for an encounter, this might be the one that sparks your imagination and you drop into your campaign or you drop into a one-shot. So let's hear this one.
Yeah, for sure. This is Inheriting Trouble. One of the PC's relatives die, leaving her land and estate to the PC. Before the party can reach the estate, the relative's in-laws, who feel that the estate should have gone to them, simply move in and take over, running off the servants and installing their own staff and guards.
Greedy relatives.
Mm-hmm. En route to the estate, the PCs hear sound of fighting in the woods. They come upon the battle in progress, a party of hunters locked in combat with a group of bandits. If the PCs aid them, the hunters don't seem particularly grateful for their help. They glare at the party and disappear into the woods. At the estate, the PCs find workers making repairs, guards on patrol, including the hunters from the forest, and the in-laws installed as lords of the estate. They ungraciously welcome the PCs, offer perfunctory words of consolation for their loss, and tell the party to get off their land. The PCs won't be able to deter them with diplomacy, and they have bribed local officials to declare them the rightful heirs of the estate. The structure of the rest of the adventure depends on your group. Some players will want to use magic or force to drive the in-laws away, while others will work the government angle, trying to remove them by lawful means, or by uncovering the corrupt officials who made the takeover, quote, legal. Some will try more creative solutions, like convincing the in-laws the estate is haunted, or driving off the servants and seeing how long the in-laws can survive without them. Later in the adventure, while the PCs are on the estate, the bandits will return in force with the intention of killing every last person that they find. The PCs can work with the in laws to beat back the attack, let the bandits and the in laws duke it out, or find their own solution to this open ended encounter. The bandits won't lay siege to the estate. Instead, they'll use guerrilla tactics to break in at multiple points and try to gain control from within. If resolved in the PC's favor, with the in laws driven out and the bandit attack repulsed, this adventure can change the scope of your campaign. Owning land, keeping the estate well supplied, and defending it against other threats can become the new focus of your game. So it's Inheriting Trouble.
Ah, yes. So I'm not going to lie, read this the first time and I thought of myself, how I would play it. I thought of the parties that I typically run and how they would do it. And then maybe some of those other options would work, but I just cannot see a party of PCs not saying, you know what, let's just kill all of them and everybody in town who's corrupt, let's just kill them all because you're our friend, PC, and this is rightfully yours and we want it. So I do like the idea that the bandits are going to come back. And so even if they try to do something else, the bandits come back with this idea to kill. Again, I can't see a party that I've ever run not saying, hey, let's just step back and let them kill everybody and then we'll wipe up whoever's left. That's also something I've seen happen. So
yeah.
I don't know. I like the idea of this mainly because I like to see I like that it's open. I like that your party can decide what to do, but I like the idea that one of the people in your party ends up with this land and home inheritance. And then they have to decide, how am I going to continue to do all this adventuring and take care of this? Because it does require care. And so are they going to set up systems? Are they going to spend every money they get in loot, send it back so that their place can grow? Are they going to get it going so well that it begins to make them money and then they can, buy extra adventuring gear? Who knows? But I always like that option. It's interesting.
Yeah. I really like the like having a keep, or a like place of residence kind of thing. I think that's cool to anchor them in the world, and I think that's something that I've talked about. Like, no matter what I do, somehow it turns into like a world traveler like thing. And, even maybe that kind of thing would focus that, if that's what you were going for, is to like keep people somewhat tethered to a place, to like, you actually own this,
They say that confinement and barrier, that's not the right word, but those things are the key, are the sponsor of creativity, that they make creativity. The more you parameters, that's the word I'm looking for. The more you put parameters on and have to stick in them. I've never run a game where we didn't take off into the world. And so I would be interested to hear of anybody here who decided to run a campaign and ran it like all in one city or all in one community. That just breaks my mind to even think about. But it'd be fun to try. Might inspire some creativity in me.
Yeah. I think that question of, you're saying like being surprised if someone chose in a different way, I guess, out of the groups that we play in. And that was the question I had, was kind of how to make it not just about fighting. Cause like, I think it's like, if that's the choice they want to make, cool, but not to like weight it that way. Sometimes I think it's like easy to weight it to like, oh yeah, battle, obviously, kind of thing. And one of the things I had thought about was maybe there's somebody in that in-law family who is kind and friendly with the player characters. It's like somebody they knew from the past or something, to give like it not just to be, okay, these people are terrible and greedy and we are in the right. So, kind of thing, but to complicate it enough where it's like, no, they're still terrible and greedy, but there's like at least one person who's maybe holding back the tide of wrath here, that's coming.
To make more of a gray
area. Yeah. Or at least like, we're not going to go wipe everybody out because of that, so, which I guess they could just wipe everybody out except that person, if that's really what they wanted to do. But I do think like trying to figure out a way to, I don't want to say necessarily like to reward not fighting, but at least to make it an even kind of level playing field, I guess, for the options there, kind of thing.
And we have to understand that there are people who think completely different. And though I can hardly imagine that, there are some people who like that is their first course of action, is like, oh, let's resolve this with negotiation. Let's go in and do stealthy stuff in town or whatever. it's like when I take a personality test and I'm like, I can't believe everybody's not like me. Well, obviously, it's because I think that way. I feel like everybody thinks that way. Not so.
What I think they should do is pull a Count of Monte Cristo and take on new identities and like do all these crazy under the radar things to like wear down the in-laws, and it just takes years. And then they find that's the whole game is them just
That's the whole game. This attrition on your in-laws.
Yeah. Ben West said party pulling money to buy a place together in a spot could help to anchor that too, and that's kind of a cool thing mid game if like the group like bought a keep, or something like that. DeBerry said you'll need a better name than Zatara. A little Counting Monte Cristo reference there. Nice, very nice. Yeah, cool. I do like the idea of like a place, for the group. I think just the getting to it is kind of interesting.
Well, that's a great lead into our kind of main topic today, talking about having a place. We're starting our series on the idea of place. And today we're talking about a very specific set of places of need. Adam, tell us what that's all about.
Yeah. So Wataya Hotel lent me this book, The World Builder's Guide to Societies, Essentials for Writers, Game Developers, and Dungeon Masters from Brent. I'm just going to stick with that right now. But this is, I'll put this in our socials too, but the really cool book, really a lot of awesome. If you're like, I don't know where to start with like fantasy reading, like this is a good fantasy sci-fi, that kind of stuff. He just names off so many authors and so many books in like reference to things that even if you're like, I just want something to read, I think it's like a worthwhile, but really cool ideas about world building, whether you're a writer or a DM or whatever you're doing. But when I read this last year, one of the sections, one of the chapters is on place. And as soon as I read that, as I was reading it, I'm like, I want to talk about these ideas like within games, because I think it's a really cool anchoring point, a really cool grounding point. And, one of the things like that came to mind and he talks about in there is like, just place in general, not like even the places of need yet, but just place in general. There's like focus points that happen when you're looking at place. Like when you think about a show or a book or whatever, your game, like it's kind of rooted in like, where is it happening? That's like that setting. Those things show like the culture and the feel of what you're in, place usually does that for that. And locations, can be both like something like, he uses like Harry Potter. So, it's like place could be Hogwarts, and it also could be the room of requirement within Hogwarts. Like there's like layers upon layers of place that you can focus in on. And I think that's a really cool thing with like, just considering in general place within your games is there can be these larger ideas. So I have like Tifa's Edge, was the city that the game started in, but we also have the Sun and the Moon, like tavern. That's like a smaller place within the place kind of thing. And we can look in those ways. And there's even stuff within those things. But location also like can like intro and set a feeling for what you're doing. So again, Tifa's Edge for me was trying to set this tone of the like the Thieves Guild and this urban feel. And it did a job, which we'll get to when we like break down the campaign in a few weeks, hopefully. But like it did a job of like hopefully pushing forward into like what was going to come to in some ways. So you have things like even I'm reading Lord of the Rings again, the Bag End, we started Bag End in Hobbiton for both, the Fellowship of the Ring and the Hobbit. It sets a tone for what this life is like kind of thing. And then there's a shift as it goes on. So that's kind of like place. And that really like gripped me, these just kind of ideas about like the importance of paying attention to that in our games. But then he breaks down all these different ways, and like places of need is the one we're going to talk about today. Next week is places of note, and it goes on and on. But to kind of define that idea, is a place necessary for society to continue, is how he defines that. So a place of need is a place necessary for society to continue. And he says, which kind of confused me in the way he writes it, but he says 3, maybe 4 things. And he says food, government, education, and then the half of one, I guess, is trade, because I think it kind of falls into some of those other pieces, but it's its own thing as well. So kind of after talking about a little bit that, Matthew, you got any like kind of initial thoughts like that come to mind for places of need before we go deeper?
I think he made a distinction in there about how religious places, places of ceremony, places of faith and stuff like that are not considered places of need. They're considered places of note, mostly because they're something that you can choose to be in, but it's not like necessary.
Right.
And I think, in some aspects, those sorts of things are going to crop up, those places of, religious and faith ceremony. Even in like the most, primitive tribe, they're going to have something.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's, I know he makes a distinction there. So that's not in this places of need.
Right. Yeah.
Thing. And then he talks, with his idea about trade. Again, he gets into this idea, even with food, that there's a distinction sometimes, like a tavern would not necessarily be a place of need. It's more a place of luxury. People go and sit and
right.
But the fact that they have to have, orchards and a place where they slaughter animals and stuff like that. These are places of need, granaries. They have to have certain things in order to produce food for people to eat. And so I think a big thing in thinking about the places of need is just thinking about, as you set each place, what kinds of things are going to stick out and be kind of iconic of these different places.
Yeah, for sure.
And then how can they be used in game? And I think that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about with this here today. And so even with those food places, with the government places, with the what was the third one? Food, government, education, right? However that happens. And some people think, oh, well, you're not going to have a university in every place. No, you don't. Some places it's just going to be like apprenticeships, like a blacksmith apprenticing another black, the education is not necessarily sitting and doing book learning, but like it could very well be part of what's going on in a place that's high wizardry, high mage population. There may be, the library may be a very, very important part. And so beginning to look at like, what are the places essential in each of these 4, and then how can they kind of play a role in your campaign possibly, and what kinds of conflicts, because really story rides on conflict, right? A story with no conflict is not really a story. It's just a kind of a fun memory and then done. But like for there to be some conflict introduced is what makes your PCs do anything. And so, what kinds of conflicts can happen around each of these kinds of places of need? So, I think it would be neat to kind of go through these in order and say, okay, well, let's talk about the food related places. Let's talk about the government. Let's talk about the education. Let's talk about the trade stuff and talk about kind of those 3 areas. What are the places? How can they be, used in your story, and then have
for sure. Yeah. I wanted to tag, before we do that really quick, I just wanted to tag something on. I think the conflict is the inciting thing. But like within those things, I think the reason, like it's interesting for us to, be like, oh yeah, these are part of this, and, to read how it's necessary for culture, to society to continue, and all these things, but like what it does for the game, what it does for us as we're running a game and doing that is like what you're getting at. And I was thinking about it being like, again, it's a setting piece. Any of these places are a setting piece. It's like the place we're plopping down our players, and being able to explain like, this is what you see, this is what you feel, smell, taste, like that's what you're experiencing as a character. And to be able to have action take part in that. So that's like one thing. And then like another that I think about, which I think kind of gets into the conflict thing, is that there are people there typically, like maybe there's not, and that says something about it as well. but it's like who is there in those places, because that's going to be the thing of like, which I don't want to step over what we're about to talk about, but it's like what where is the direction of the conversation going, what tasks are going to be given, what interactions take place, all that kind of stuff. And that, again, conflict I think can take, and when I say people, that could be friendly people or hostile people or monsters or those kind of things, like what kind of entities are there, and then just what happens, like what is the actual action that takes place in that. When we make a dungeon, it's like, okay, this is the feel of the dungeon. It's been dug out of a sand pit, and it's constantly got trickling stuff going on. It's kind of the feel. It's gritty and dank and all this thing. What people are there? Well, there's hippo men in there for some reason. They're half man, half hippo, and they're not happy. And what happens? Well, you got to fight over that chest over there in the corner. Kind of, it's like those are the things we're thinking through, even if we're not necessarily putting the like that exact kind of terminology on it. And then it's like, well, what is the conflict and where does that lead, kind of deal. So I like the idea what you said though, of like, we got these 4 pieces, talking through them: food, government, education. Evan said hungry hippo. Hippo, and then trade. So yeah, like when you think of food, what are the kind of the thoughts there for it being a place of need?
Well, I think any of these places, they kind of give you the backbone of what's going on, the civilization, like context for how people live and survive and organize themselves. And so I think when I think of food, I think of mostly like when I'm thinking of places in need. Again, this is not the bar, the tavern, which is a place of food, but that's a different arena, right? So I think of like maybe some of the production places and some of the distribution and storage. Those would be the things that come in the mind for me. So in production, you got things like farms and orchards and fields, right? So any of those places and you can, this can set up the importance of, kind of the rural urban, what's happening around that also affects the city. Things like, if you're in a mountainous region, you can like really use this idea of place. Maybe they have like terraced sorts of fields or orchards that are like completely like stick out in your mind and make you like aware of like the difference of this place. So you have your farms, orchards, places where they grow food. You have places like fisheries and waterways where they may, especially if it's a coastal place. Obviously, if it's an inland place, you have a lot less of this. Maybe some people fish a pond or something. But like if you're coastal, these river-based societies, it's gonna be heavily based on what they get out of the water, and that can set up your whole campaign because like what's in the water that they have to fight with? Are there magical creatures in the water? What are the risk and rewards of being the person who goes out on the water and getting that stuff? And then obviously, if you're inland, you got the hunting for meat, for pelts, for whatever, as far as food related. So, you can highlight kind of in that how the local animals affect the society, right? How the nomads might travel because they based on like the bison. Again, you may not have bison in there, but like they base like where they roam based on where the bison roam, and that may affect that society. Or if you're a hunter, a ranger in the woods, and they go out and they hunt stuff and they bring it back, that's going to set this cast of people that you can manipulate in certain ways because they come in with the meat and the furs, and now the people in the cities, there has to be negotiation, that kind of stuff. And that gets into the second part. So you have all the stuff that you would gather, I think, with food, but then you also have the like storage and distribution of it. These things are gathered somehow. There's going to be granaries or silos or meat markets or whatever it is, and this is different than like the markets and stalls where like in a bazaar where people go and they buy stuff, although that can very much be part of what happens because of food. But the whole supply lines, as far as like getting the stuff to somewhere where it is then like purchased and then like it can be sent to other places, and you get things like maybe a caravan that's going off to take, meat and something to like this small place called Cotswold, and there's a crossroads where there's a trading post set up, and because of that affects the way your game is. So I think all this stuff, when I'm thinking of places in need, I'm thinking, okay, how does this affect the places I might put in my game?
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's from the gathering and what goes on with that, whether it's from the storage of it. And, you always have people trying to rob warehouses or make underhanded deals, whatever going on in the storage of it. Or when you get to like getting it moving and distributing, I guess that's kind of might be getting down in a trade stuff a little bit.
That's why it's a half of one.
Maybe that's why it's a half of one.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that sets up conflict places. And also just because of like the nature of food, if you have a feast, that's going to affect, or even a famine, feast years or famine years, that's going to affect the way shortages and surpluses drive your story in the cities and along the caravan routes. And, bad harvest could lead to desperation for poor people, which makes them do stuff that, whatever. So, I mean, you can think about how food can cause conflict and opportunity for hooks in your campaign.
Yeah. I think that's like a huge piece of that. Of like, I mean, it's going all the way back to your like what if question that you've talked about from the very beginning. Of okay, if we're in like an agrarian society here, like, what if that got disrupted? And like, and then like, why would it be disrupted? Well, the lizard folk are coming up out of the river and destroying the fields, and like somebody, and it can be as easy as that, of like, this is an encounter that somebody is asking for aid because of the stuff is being disrupted. And why? Well, this is that, and that could lead to another piece there. So I like that a lot. You're bringing up the conflict thing. Just asking why.
As you're like trying to brainstorm new places to have things go on with your characters. I did a campaign. I don't even remember what campaign it was. I think it was the one, Dormant Mind. I think it's the one we're kind of in now. But at the beginning of it, like, you guys went to a small place where a big part of what they did was they harvested wood, right? And so there was this big sawmill, and that like fired my mind. I'm like, oh, how could they do something cool in a sawmill? And so I came up with like this battle that would happen in here with this. They had this huge axe that was magically augmented
like
to be super sharp, and it would swing, and this thing got swinging, and
pendulum.
logs were pendulum. Like an axe that was a pendulum, and these logs that were lashed up were rolling and causing problems while people were fighting, and this axe was swinging back and forth, and like gave me a kind of a unique place that I think stuck out in my players' memories. And that never would have come about if I hadn't been like, okay, they're in the woods, and part of what they do is they gather logs, and there's lumberjacks as part of this. Okay, what can I do with that? That gave me a place to begin to build around, and it was fun. And so like, that's something that I think as you're beginning or going through a campaign, let your mind kind of think about like, what would be a place that's here? Again, this gives a real groundedness to your campaign. Your characters understand, oh, this is how the world works. But then you can throw in the most crazy, fantastic hippo men and swinging pendulums that are this kind of stuff.
Get to play with it. The Rob had written earlier, I missed it. He said it's like the prerequisite buildings in the Civilization games. You need a granary before you can build a barracks, etc. And I think that's like one, like, you have to deal with these, like, you have to feed people, to like grow. But that made me think of just, if we're asking, it's back to that setting idea of like, what kind of place am I actually like talking about for my players to interact with in this moment? And that's anywhere from like level of civilization, I guess, of like, okay, is it just like we have food is hunting and gathering, or is it like we are producing through farms, or farther on of we're in sci-fi and we push the button and food comes out and we don't know where it comes, it's like it's that kind of stuff. Like, that all tells us where we're at, and we can kind of play with that. in our games, but then there's also the level of like I don't know, complexity or society or whatever of there's going to look different with even the way food and food related things are talked about in a game, whether it's like you're out in the agriculture area or you're in the city, like that.
And
That does
I think
show
at this
different
part, I would call it not food but resources, because
resources. Yeah.
so I used in that same game. I think it was a mill. That's like a food location.
Yeah. Yeah.
They get this
Yeah,
grain.
grist
They
mill.
have to do something with it. Ended up having like this cursed stone that was then causing people to become zombified or whatever, who ate the bread. But when I talked about that lumberjack thing, trees, and we talk about whatever the resources. I think when you talk about places of need, not just food, I think it's resources. You have to
Yeah,
have
for sure.
certain resources. I guess it would probably relate around food or shelter. You talk about that hierarchy of needs. The food and
Right.
shelter
Yeah.
are always at the top. You got to have them in any society, or even as a single person. You got to have a way to get food, a way to get
Right.
shelter, and so resources for those things.
Hmm.
I think is this
Yeah.
first part.
Yeah. With the like kind of cultural feel, something I was thinking about too was I just last month I read The Alchemist again. I just felt like reading it again, and
Mhm.
one of the things that's kind of interesting with that the author does with that is I feel like I can't like I don't
Don't
not
want to
spoiling
spoil
this
it.
book, right, please. uh you can skip ahead 2 minutes here if you haven't read the book, but like when he's in Spain, there's talk about like food. That's talking about food. He's got like his flask of wine that he's taking sips out of, and there's this kind of foods that he's talked about. But then when he goes to Africa, he's it's like, well, people don't drink alcohol here, is the kind of like idea. So there's all this like there's multiple times where they're drinking tea together, and he has this like shift in the way he walks through the world because now he's doing that, and different foods as they like go through the desert that they're talked about. And that like stuck out to me a lot. And it wasn't, I don't think, even to do with our conversation today. It was just like, oh, that really is a setting piece that's showing the culture difference and how these things are played out. And I think that's like a good use in your game, just to show like you are in a different place. We're not in Kansas anymore. And this is different. So I like that a lot, but kind of talking government.
Okay.
Government. What do you think about that?
Well, obviously, the guy who lives out in the frontier is going to have a different kind of government. You get into the cities, the places that are more urban, government becomes larger and more involved in a lot of things. But I think anytime you're in any place where people gather, there's got to be some sort of governance going on. So it could be, the guy who owns the fort is also the guy who marshals the land. Maybe that's all you got. He appoints himself mayor. But you get into places where there's towns where they have town halls and keeps and administrative centers and places where rulers get together to meet. There's a whole idea of security that has to happen in these places, and then accessibility to those places, and the connection to just kind of the populace and the people in general, how that all works. So you got the places of governance are going to be one of those, whatever that looks like. You got some kind of court. Judiciary, or what would you call that? Be the court or the law, the punishment system. Obviously, whenever you have people who are breaking the law, you got to have ways to mete out justice, and so locations for resolving disputes, enacting the laws. They can be places that are neutral, but they can also be places where you can get that idea of intrigue or the negative idea of the legal system. But you got the places of governance themselves, and then you got the places that kind of hold up the law, and then you got those. I guess if you get into especially bigger cities, places where you have embassies or places of diplomacy. Someone from another power may have a pocket in this city, and of course those can make their own things. So that's one, that whole kind of the center of power stuff. But then there's also the whole military thing when you're talking about government. And so this, I think you see in a lot of games, things like barracks and training grounds. You see things like fortifications and the people who man those, the the places where they protect against invasions, and even something like the walls that occur in a city can begin to have a big shape on your city. Because like, what if like in that most inner place are the rich, and then they have these walls that protect them, and then there's like this other area with other walls, and then the outlying is just like if you're fending for yourself. Sorry, you're who make our agriculture and bring in all of our food, but when it comes to like an invasion, sorry about you, we're way here in the inner walls. And what does that do? What does that look like in your game, and how does that affect the way people think and feel?
Right. Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's that like the walls and the defense of people. That's interesting. That reminds me of so it was Monster Man podcast, and he had an episode that was like it was like guards was the creature, or like somebody had asked about like a creature. Right. But he had some really interesting, it was more like historical kind of like looking into of I have a very, this is my idea of how a guard is going to be in my games, no matter where a lot of times where they're at. And ever since listening to that, I'm like, no, it would be a little different where, this big city may have, it's like these people are paid to be, that they're essentially a soldier who's guarding the city kind of thing. Whereas like these outlying towns or hamlets or whatever may just have like, there is one dude who owns a sword, and for like 4 hours a day, he walks around making sure that like nobody's stealing anything, kind of thing. It's like, or anything even smaller, but, or like we're getting attacked, so the two people who own bows now are going to try to do something about it. Like that's a little bit different of a situation than like I think what I had in the past, where it's like, well, everybody kind of, it's like dude with chainmail and a helmet is always somewhere, walking around. But so I think that's interesting when thinking about the way you're talking about like walls, or like just there's different varieties of that, and that can again set the tone for those things. My mind went to people a lot with the government, it's kind of like the people there piece that I was talking about earlier, of like things like royals, nobility, but you brought up the judicial system, of like judges and court kind of people. But then like what happens, it's like, well, a lot of missions can be given, or jobs, through that. But then also like there could be feasts that come out because of, it's like a government ordained thing, or like, it's like, hey, we're putting this holiday on, or this feast on, or things like riots could take place around government, kind of thing. I think like to your game, there was the situation where the guy who was making all the bread, or had like kind of worked that to do that thing, got found out, and the people became a mob, and they dragged him before the court, the guy that was basically in charge of the government official there. And that was when that riot broke out for us, is like in that moment. Or like executions, too, which that one wasn't a formal execution, but like it did happen, and we didn't make it stop. So, but, those kind of things, I think, like when I was thinking about government, those are like things that happen around that, other than just the day-to-day, like people are pushing papers and, having debates or whatever and stuff. But that was
so
kind
much
of interesting.
Government, when I think of government in a D&D game, it's places that set up intrigue and barriers to who knows who's on the inside, whether it's knowledge or goods or whatever. I feel like, and maybe it's because almost every D&D campaign has like some sense of corruption in government somewhere. Somebody in there is on the take. Not always. Sometimes you have totally good governments, but I don't think I've ever been in a D&D campaign where that's been the case. And so often my mind goes to like the intrigue, or the people behind, these plans that affect lots of people, and your PCs always end up getting entangled in that in some way. And so,
right. Yeah.
That's always, again, these places are going to be in a campaign, and it feels real and it feels more grounded if you have them, and that's a natural place to begin to do that. And so I have very, very few games where not the idea of a noble or the royal or something didn't come into play in some aspect.
Yeah, for sure. I think back at your Oracle of Order, I can't remember what he was exactly. Was he a governor? The guy who kept saying praise Tiamat the whole time, and our Dragonborn was like freaking out.
Thought he was like with our friend who was a Dragonborn. He thought he was like saying stuff that he would love, but he didn't understand the whole idea of good dragon, bad dragon. He just didn't understand it all. Got a picture put up on his wall of Tiamat and drove off. But he was the guy who gave us access to all the stuff we needed. So our Dragonborn's over there biting his lip and just putting up with it.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah.
You're talking about the walls inside walls, and I think like a fun thing within the games is government stuff seems to make a like barrier that players want to break into or sneak into, or it's like there's like things to be found out in this place, and I think that can be like a fun like instigator too of like, even if it is trying to seek out the corruption, or just like, well, we need to get the MacGuffin that's in there, or whatever it is. It's like there's a wall there that people just want to get over, and I think that's a fun like.
And the beauty of government is that wall is always more protected when it's closer to the government. So the closer you get to power, the more guards, the more traps, the more wizards that help protect. All this stuff is harder to break into, which makes it more exciting to break into.
Yeah, right.
for people sometimes. It's different than the warehouse,
right?
Which may have some stuff on it, or the farmyard that's being overrun by zombies. Like nobody's doing any sort of protection of that unless you're doing that. So.
Yeah, for sure. What about education?
Education. I think with education, again, it really depends on how this can really kind of shape what your world looks like and your place looks like, and the different places of your world, if you're those globetrotting types, because you can have small village schools, right, that maybe try to teach people a little bit of magic, but it's pretty low level. You always know that. You hardly ever have like that tiny small village with like a schoolhouse and like an amazing wizard there, training up amazing wizards. Usually it's like he can teach them a few spells, and then they go on to the bigger city to get to the university, right? Then you get to these grand arcane universities in places like Rothman that you have in your game, where the whole city is kind of built around the arcane university that's there,
right?
And they can shape that place very much. The idea, I think this would also include the idea of libraries, which in our games almost always come up. I don't care how small the place is. Like, there's a place over there with some books. I don't know what they think about book learning. And there's this one guy who loves knowledge and books, and he's like, "You stay away from my treasure of knowledge." And then you go in there every time you're in a mission and look at maps and look at books and try to do research, all the way to the ideas of temples of knowledge, right? And this kind of gets into religion a little bit, which is not one that he said was a place of need, but more a place of luxury. But this idea, I think in some places, you can make these religious institutions that double as places of learning, where they blend divine and practical teaching stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But then there's that other side, that purely practical. And this is like the difference between university and trade school, like here in our time, right? Where you got the craftsmen's guild, you got the apprentices learning how to do blacksmithing or carpentry or brewing or whatever, perfuming, if you're in a perfumer's guild.
Perfumers Guild,
Perfumers Guild, got to bring that back. But that can be a place where NPC mentors are, and they can serve as a place where trade disputes happen, or it can create things that happen in your game. And then the last one, if you're thinking, we kind of talked about it in government, but I think it can also kind of bleed into education, and that is martial training grounds.
Yeah, that's right.
Academies for fighters or monks or paladins. They might have their own unique traditions or rivalries, that kind of stuff with other schools or other places.
Right.
But all of this goes back to, I think, of remember I said how instead of just food, I would call it resources. This is a different kind of resource. It's that
Right.
knowledge as a resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who controls the flow of knowledge? How does that influence your society? Do you have secretive academies and elitist organizations that happen in your place? And how does
Right.
that
Yeah.
affect things? And these are all great places for quest hooks, you know,
Mm-hmm.
any of these places, whether it's the blacksmith shop or
Yeah.
the secret academy that teaches, you know, the way of the long death that you have to pay $30 from Wizards of the Coast
That's how you
Network.
learn it.
I learned by shelling out $30.
Yeah, I liked
The fairy community college ad says always important.
always important.
Important.
It's in every game. The you mentioned earlier, it wasn't like back before we even really started breaking these down. You talked about the apprenticeship thing. I do think that's like an important piece of that. Of like, again, it's that what level of space are we in, you know, kind of thing. And like you said, you're not going to have this insane magical university in the middle of like a hamlet that has, you know, 100 people in it, kind of thing. But and if you do, like, you've turned things up on its head, you know, kind of thing, and that's maybe have a reason for that. But I like that idea of thinking in terms of like the blacksmith apprenticing, you know, a kid, or even, and it's kind of mixing into the religion, but like there's a shaman elder that has a group of disciples, you know, around her, that's kind of like in this little village that you're going through. And like, what does that do? Well, one of these disciples has come across something in the forest, and it needs looked at. You know, it's like, it's the hooks, like you just said, of
Right.
those are just more opportunities to give hooks.
And to let your characters make rich backstory, you know,
because
they can
be part of those
places and things as part of where they came from, or how they came in, or who they're related to.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, we talked about that. I mean, like the whole thing with Rothman and the like Golden Lyceum came from your backstory in my game. You know, it's like Big Brother got taken instead of me to the Magic University. I think you posed it a little bit differently, but I'm like, okay, that's going to go here in the capital, and there's going to be reasons, and you know, things like that of come out with different, you know, different people's backstories too. So yeah, that is a really cool piece of that too. Trade.
I think with trade, I was sitting here just trying to think of this a little bit before we got to it. I get really mixed up. So maybe the food thing should have just stayed food. I feel like, you know, maybe the stuff they need to build their own place, like, you know, wood for homes and stuff like that. But then you get into instead of you know, the resource of what you're using yourself, you get into the resources that then are greater than you, that you export and import. You interact with other people in the world. And so maybe the resource stuff goes here. But, you know, when I think of places that would have to do with trade and commerce, you know, whether it's, you know, there's marketplaces and bazaars, you know, that's kind of in your own place a little bit. But like ports and harbors, you know, where you're going to be, you know, critical for, if you're a, you know, a sea coastal kind of place.
Yeah, for sure.
That's critical for your livelihood and your trade. And so you can think about the challenges of piracy and what that does there in these ports, storms and how that affects things, customs enforcement, all this kind of stuff, whatever. But that also then gets into like the production. So like earlier I said, oh yeah, you're getting wood, but like, what about like mines and quarries? Okay, so you do use some stone, and maybe you want to like enrich your city, but like gyms do nothing if they just kind of come in and sit in your city. That's all for like, how rich are you compared to other people, and how can you use that to buy from other people? So I feel like these raw materials, some of them, the whole idea of extracting those, whether it's the mine themselves, that can be a wonderful place for anything to happen, because it's a dangerous, it's prone to exploitation by those government people, but it's also in its own right, you might run into who knows what down there. Places like we talked about, the kind of craftsmen and artisan districts, you know, where blacksmithing and alchemy and stuff like that happens.
Yeah, right.
That's a kind of a trade place. Warehouses, storehouses, we talked about those kind of a little bit before, but I feel like they kind of almost fit more here in trade. This idea that these facilities are often targeted in thefts and smuggling operations, whatever. And so you have these sorts of ideas, and then you think, okay, well, how can this play into our campaign? What about guild rivalries? You know, the people who, the different people who have minds, and like, okay, we're trying to get our stuff sold, but so are they, and they're our rival, and so there's these power struggles between different merchant guilds or unions, or a place for political intrigue for people who have a stake in whatever.
Right.
Supply chain stuff, that idea of trade has to go from one place to another, but there's always in every campaign, you're protecting a caravan somewhere because there's disruption of trade by bandits or monsters or natural disasters, whatever. But those can have a ripple effect too. Like, let's say nothing is getting from the woods to people who need wood, just your classic Catan thing. It's like, well, I don't have any brick. I need brick.
Right.
I need somebody who has brick. And then what's the holdup? How can I get trade going and whatever? That whole cultural exchange idea. I think all of that comes into these places of trade. And again, they may make some wonderful places for fights. They may make some wonderful places for intrigue. They may make some stuff that pushes the story along.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, I'm just glad you brought up caravans, because I was thinking about either caravans or I guess just like ship delivery trade, nautical trade. Like both of those things, like we talk about like travel and like what do you do with travel time and that kind of stuff. And both of those give opportunity for it not to just be like, well, the five of us just walk down the road, kind of thing. Like there's more action happening around you, and it's like a moving location in some ways with those things. But I was thinking about, so early in our game, the recent game, you guys came across a town, and it was being attacked by gnolls, and you guys fought the gnolls off, and then you followed the gnoll trail and dealt with the remaining gnolls kind of thing. And you came back and you guys helped there was a lot of like burned down buildings and just wrecked places. And you guys helped them deal with that before you were heading north. But it was kind of like, we need to clean this up. And like, I think they even had destroyed the bridge. So it's like you needed to fix the bridge or something to continue going north. But one of the things that may have been somewhere else, but there was a point where Brandon's character was approached by, or maybe he just took the job, but the elder of the village had said, hey, the place you're going has a builder's guild, and we need a bunch of supplies floated down the river to here to rebuild, or we're not going to be able to do it. Here's a bunch of money, since you just saved us, and I've known you for 30 minutes, like here's a bunch of money on your word, like I need you to go up to the Builders Guild in Bullens, tell them, give them this, like, this is what we need kind of paper or whatever. And it's kind of silly, like nobody would probably do that in real life, but like it was a quest, but it wasn't like way out of the way. It was like on the way kind of thing, but it like tied that way of like, it tied him into that. And it gave him a decision, because part of his character is like selfish, kind of thing. Yeah. And like, that's part of it. And it's like, is he going to actually, like, for all I knew, he was just going to take the money and continue to go and not ever do it, which he paid for it and did all this stuff. But part of that too, for me as a GM, was like looking at the part of it for me as a GM was, how can I like tie these people to the next place that they're going? And part of that was this use of trade, because it was like, well, in my mind, I already knew Bullens was they had this builders guild. That was part of my like creation of that town. And it's like, well, this is going to immediately tie them to, the thought process was like, very first thing, you're going to walk into town and go to the Builders Guild and deal with this, which did not happen at all. It was way later, but it helps to flesh it out. And it was like, oh, this is a thing that could be unique to them. And I think that's a really good way to use trade, as well as the caravan and that kind of stuff, but also here's a spot that you need to go to do something, and then you get to interact with it. So that was a cool way we used it in our game.
Yeah.
Oh, another thing I want to say, I'm sorry. I caught you as you were taking breath. A market means that there's a black market probably, and I think that's a fun thing to bring into also is like, okay, if there's trade, there's also this like underground thing going on. And you could be like, lawful people trying to put an end to that. You could be people interacting with it. You could be anywhere in between, kind of thing. But that's another fun little like piece to the way trade can work underground as well.
Yeah. What I was taking a breath in to say was, I think where it really gets fun is when you start to play with the interconnectedness of these different places of needs. Like they're very connected. You have the farmers making the food, which then has to get to the cities, which the cities house the administrators who are like doing what they do to gain advantage. And that's where intrigue and all that comes in, and trade routes connect all of this stuff. And so all these things can happen together. And you can think about the chain reactions of how like any part of that, if something's going on there, it can disrupt all the other parts.
Yeah, for sure.
Play into your game. And so
that's cool.
The thing I was about to say is that you get, we've talked about it all through this, but you get like adventure hooks through these places, right? Maybe it's protecting the essential places of a granary that has to be protected, or a certain resource, a mine, and your PCs end up being hired or for some reason going to do that. It can be restoring these places of need, like a university or a library has been decimated, and you guys end up like being the ones to try and help rebuild this and get it back to its former glory. But there's always that idea of there's an underbelly. There's an underbelly to all of this.
Yeah,
so
right.
You said there's a market, there's a black market.
Yeah, right.
There's government, there's corrupt government. There's, in every part of this, a big part of what PCs do is explore and reveal the underbelly, and then expose and eliminate. Hopefully, most PCs. Some maybe you're helping that. I think we all started off in the Thieves Guild. That's part of an underbelly. In the city, and we were part of that to start. Now we didn't stay with that because. Our party ended up deciding, we're done with that. We're going to move to other world-saving things, and so we're in that city. But yeah. So Place offers a lot of chance for you to kind of ground your campaign. It gives you ways to populate your city. If you're like, how do I even start this idea of world building? Well, it's like Rob was saying, in these civilization things, you have certain places that are going to be. Plop those down and then start to add on around them. And it can definitely give you hooks for adventure, different places where your characters, aside from what we're going to be talking about in the future, there's other places that they can also get these hooks. And we're going to talk about those probably more than you want to hear. As much as you want to hear in following episodes.
For sure. Well, cool.
All right. Well, hey, so that's places of need. Hopefully that's helped a little bit. We're going to get into places of note. I think it is next time, right?
Yep.
So you'll want to tune back in. But we're going to today run to our NPC. We always kind of throw out an NPC that hopefully can be somebody maybe you just throw in as a side piece in sometimes they become central pieces. Sometimes they're just like this. You need a personality to fit this. And maybe today you're looking for Senora Adelina Reyes, who is an unlucky captain. Just life hasn't worked out for her the way she wants. And what she would say is just once, I'd like our plans not to be blown off course by hurricanes or our own inept sea captains or those uncouth privateers. Okay, so she is this dark-haired, dark-skinned beauty, right? Resplendent in her gowns for formal occasions. She's very familiar with that arena. But as a military governor, she more often wears a slightly altered male military uniform for her day-to-day duties, a custom-fitted conquistador's helm, and a breastplate for military action, and she thrives in those areas. When beset by instances of bad luck, she slaps this riding crop that she always carries irritably against her leg. Now, when it wrote that, all I could think of was Hogan's Heroes and who was the guy in command? Was it Colonel Klink? Colonel Klink, he would always slap that and he'd slap that thing against his leg. That's all I could think about from then on. Her personality is she regards attacks by enemy captains, but most especially privateers, as a personal affront to her. As a member, she's a member of aristocracy, right? And she's always viewed herself as superior in most respect. And she embraces the concept of noblige oblige, right? She believes that she's entitled to that. Adelina does not shy away from responsibility, however, so she's eager to act on behalf of the crown. As a younger woman, she charmed many of the male persuasion with her stunning beauty. When sickness and war claimed the lives of many of the men in her family, she assumed leadership of the family fortune and lands. Her able administration of the property brought the attention of the crown to her, and she was chosen to oversee an important military outpost in the colonial waters. Right? Her main duty was to ensure that treasure ships reached their destination along the main sea trade route from the colonial islands to the mainland, and thus she's always has these privateers and pirates basically attacking, and she just takes it all personally. And that's who she is. So she's eager to do well. She is part of the aristocracy. She did kind of prove herself when the men in her family all were killed. She was kind of noticed and put up, and that's Senora Adelina Reyes that you might use in your campaign. Could you see a place for her in a campaign you would run, Adam?
So I like her a lot. I like all the details. And yes, the short answer is yes.
The short answer, yes.
I just don't know how much it would really get developed is my kind of problem with her. For some reason, I don't know why. It's like, she's not gripping me in that way. Like, I could think if they were I'm trying to think of, I guess if the group was, they were going along with a trade, a nautical trade that was going across the thing and needed to protect it or something like that. Like, she could be the captain of that, and then you would have interaction. But I like her. My notes were, I like her a lot for sea travel. She's a good mission giver, and I could not think of anything else to say. So.
The only thing I could think is, she's the hook, or she's the way to get your PCs on a boat, protecting, because she just can't stand these privateers, the pirates, the whatever it is, or just the idea that she's always unlucky. It's a storm, it's something. And so this reputation going in, but she's offering so much money because she's sick of getting taken advantage of.
Yeah, right.
And so her personality is a little bit strict, a little bit spoiled, because she's noble and she just expects that this stuff should work for her. But you guys, you've got good coin in your hand, and you're there to do that on the boat. That's where I would use her. And like you said, she would not be she continues to be in my campaign over and over again. She'd probably just be somebody along the way. That's
right. Me. Yeah. I really do like her, just disdain, and she's so put out by the fact that people would dare to attack them. I'm a big fan of that. So yeah, that's good stuff. Cool. We do have a couple questions. If you got time, I think we got time for that today.
Yeah.
A little bit. This is the end of the Haversack question from Eric Bright that came in. We've kind of slowly been going through. And the first one is this: thinking about time, how do you create a sense of urgency to events in the world? Urgency in the world.
For me, it almost always happens because there's a looming catastrophe. And the thing is, in the beginning, that looming catastrophe is maybe hinted at. There's some forewarning, some foreboding. Then it's noted somewhere along in there. They begin to figure out this is what's coming. And then some things happen that kind of push the idea that this is getting closer. And as I get toward the end, it has to get more and more urgent, as far as you see the effects in your day to day as the PC. Yeah. That's what starts to create the sense of urgency. You begin to know, hey, when this happens, that's the tipping point, and we're not going to come back from that. Yeah. Again, I typically run more epic things, and so it's if this doesn't get stopped, the end of the world is here as we know it. Maybe now everybody lives as demon husks in a barren land, and that's what the future holds if we don't stop this soon. And so I try to push that. Then what makes the urgency is the fact that in the beginning, it's not urgent. In the beginning, it's, they come together, something has happened. It's not the end of the world thing that drives them into motion. It's usually other hooks that then begin to develop into this. Oh, I see the end of the world coming. And then that gets played more and more. If you play that from the very beginning, the end of the world, man, it's hard to keep a building sense of urgency. It's like that constant sense of urgency that can just become overwhelming and then background static.
Right. For sure.
So
for sure.
I really do. For me, I think it has to do with, they start with the stakes much lower, and then the stakes have to get higher and higher. And the urgency can also be pushed on by betrayals and plot twists, things they didn't expect, people they didn't expect stabbing them in the back, or, whatever it is.
Yeah. I like that. The stakes raising, and like the escalation of things, is good. I think like Eric used the word time in there, and I feel like, the crunch of time is how I tend to want to bring up urgency in like larger scale things. So it's like, continue to use the game we're in now. Armies are encroaching on the city, and the PCs are like the tip of the spear going to like try to take the head of the snake. And I'm using so many like whatever phrases there. So sorry for that. But they're trying to take out the big bad evil guy before the armies come in and kill everybody, kind of thing, because that's the best way that they can feel like they can be used, and instead of just being like frontline fighters and that kind of thing. So the way that I was thinking through was like, okay, you guys kept being told, the foot soldier, the army on land is going to be here in like 3 days, and the naval group that's coming in is probably going to be 4, kind of thing. So that kept being said in various ways and reiterated, and you guys are like, okay, well, we're going to go. And then it was like, well, it's going to take you, it was like, I think originally it was like, well, it's going to take you a day to get there and a day to get back. But then the second piece that I bring into the urgency part is like, they're not going to get a cakewalk from point A to point B. It's going to be, there are obstacles in the way. There are going to be things that are constantly trying to pull you out. And I've talked about that in like the travel. That's kind of the earlier part of our campaign, excuse me, our recent campaign, where it's like, well, we're trying to take this guy to this place so he can lay down the mantle of, the leader of this thing, and somebody else can take up that mantle. Everything, the first third of the campaign was people getting interrupted as they're trying to take this guy. It's like, well, now we're going over here to do this. Now we're going to save these people. Now this bridge is broken and all that stuff. And I think like, that's like that wasn't necessarily for urgency's sake. That was for like building tension and story into this of like, oh, here's some hooks to grab onto. But in the case of like, okay, you guys had 2 days, but you knew 3 days they were going to be there. Well, now it's like, well, but there's this other thing over here where if we go take care of it, then the guy at the end that we're trying to take out will be a little weaker for having done that. So is it worth taking 6 hours to go do that? And so that's another urgency thing of trying to like compact the time and make it feel like, oh, the sand is actually going through the hourglass right now, and when it's over, something's gonna happen. So I think in those terms, also of, if you're in a longer game and you've had opportunity, or even if it's like, say it's red markets and you have these people from the beginning, you're like, these are my dependents. It's like the people who are depending on you or who you care about or you've formed relationships with, if they're in danger, there is a sense of urgency that can come from that. So I know, again, I'm just using this because this is where we're at, but like Leonas's fiance is in Tifa's Edge now. So he has a little bit more of a reason to care. It's one person and a lot of people, but he has a little more reason to care because someone he cares about deeply is in the midst of the danger, not just a kind of a sea of faces, kind of thing. So that can be, you don't want to like overplay that hand, but that can be like a piece of that too for urgency. And then I think like signals, I totally ripped this off, but like you have that moment in the Return of the King in the movie where Minas Morgul shoots this giant laser up, and it's not a laser, but it's like magic shoots up into the air as like the signal for the armies to move. And there's this awesome scene where they're like everybody's watching from all over the place and they're seeing the sky light up, and it's like evil and nasty, and it's like something's coming, and I ripped that off the other day for our game of just like that thing being shot in the air of a signal. But those kind of things, yeah, it's like there's a signal that's going off, and it's like, well, what does that mean? And that could even be not necessarily like a signal between people, but it could be like, let's make it more of like a dungeon crawl. I'm in the dungeon and we know that this dungeon could collapse because it's whatever has happened in here. And as we're going through room by room, you hear cracking and breaking, or like we actually see that room over there collapse in on itself. And it's like, that's a different kind of urgency that's happening, but it's a signal to the players of like, okay, things are shifting in the world and this could be dangerous kind of thing. So I like signals. And then I think just choice too is a way to build urgency of like, both of these things are important, but you can only do one. It's the superhero thing. It's, it's like the Joker coming before Batman and saying, well, you have this choice or this choice. Both are horrible, but you can only do one. You can't save them both kind of thing, and I think that's like another kind of, there's an urgency to that maybe, okay, well, what is option C and can we pull it off in time kind of thing. So those things for me were things that came up on that.
Yeah.
He goes on to say, related to that, similar, but I hope distinct, how do you build tension in scenes? So this isn't just the world. It's like during an encounter or during a conversation or something like that.
Well, I think the first way, you were just talking about you're going through a dungeon and you know that this place is prone to collapse. Having just a set, say a little set schedule that I decide tonight when we're going through on rounds 4 and 7 and 10. There's going to be a deep thrum in the earth and everything's going to shake and some things are going to fall. And maybe making us a little closer. That idea of just like building, this has happened at, it seems random intervals. They don't know, why, but like it seems like it's getting closer and closer together. I'd planned that out before as far as like number of rounds and what's going on. But that can begin to build attention. Or something that can build attention is one of your characters in a fight. You're fighting, and one of them like ends up like petrified, or one of them ends up like unconscious. Something that can begin to build tension as well, because we got to get this fight over if I'm going to take care of them before it's too late. That sort of thing. I think there's a lot of ways to build tension. Those are just a couple that came to the front of my mind. With that, there's probably a million more. I
think I've learned some things from the Sentinels RPG, the scene tracker, with that kind of thing too. And it's like, that's like a, a formalized part of the game where it's like everybody's seeing this. There are, 8 stars that we're going to move through, and there's going to be things that happen at, when you go from the green zone to the yellow zone, or yellow zone to the red zone. Like that's all known. It's a very meta, kind of thing, but it works really, really well. And I think like that's not something I want to use, in every encounter or situation, like in a D&D game or Pathfinder. But there are times where, I remember one time, I don't even remember what it was exactly, but I just like put squares on the map and started marking them off, and there was a reason. It wasn't just like arbitrary, but it was like, I think the group at least was like, oh, something's like counting down, and maybe there was a little more tension there. you can make that a little more story oriented or narrative, where it's like, I don't know, the bad guy has 3 gems on his breastplate, and they, they like light up every round. And it's like something's gonna happen when the 3rd one lights up. I think like that could be, even that's kind of maybe hokey, but like that kind of thing could be a situation of just some kind of countdown or scene tracker, or the group is fighting around this giant hourglass that's running out, and it's like something's tied to that is a situation. So you could be more narrative, or you could be pretty like formal, like meta with it too. I think either one can add to that a little bit. We've mentioned the environmental collapse, threats to like innocent people, is going to bring like an urgency. That's kind of going back to the Sentinels thing, but they have the system of maybe you succeeded, but you also succeeded with a twist. And maybe the twist is, the cab full of people is hanging off the bridge. So somebody needs to go save those people in the midst of this fight. So there's tension and urgency, but also that's a good way to like make a scene more interesting and like complex, of like, well, this isn't just about me running over and hitting this guy with a sword 20 times. It's like, I need to run over here and save these people out of the wagon that's about to fall into the volcano, before like fighting the dragon kind of thing. So I think that can bring some of that too, of just like the threat to innocent people around, or needing, it's kind of like you said, like if somebody got knocked out, it's like, well, how can I get to them and help them come to consciousness again before they die, kind of thing. That brings urgency, but you don't want to do that at the expense of a player who has to sit there and bleed out the whole battle. So that's a hard piece too. Fire, magic surges, like that, those are fun things, just to like, those are environmental, but you kind of throw in there too. So that's some thoughts I have for that.
Yeah. The more that like there's something didn't happen, but it could happen. The more you can impose that, it's like you said, where the things are lighting up on the necklace. Or say you find out that like somebody's been poisoned, but you don't know which one of your PCs. And every few rounds, it's like, you all begin sweating. Like the tension, the longer it like, something can happen, but doesn't, that is tension. That's the definition of the tension, right? So anyway, you can make that happen.
I love it. That's cool.
Is that it for us on the Haversack?
That's it for the Haversack. Yep.
All right. Well, guys, I think that's going to be it for us today. Do remember to join us as we continue on in this Places series. Next time, Places of Note.
Places of Note. Yep, that's right.
So that's going to be something fun. We want you to join and be with us for that. But for today, we'll call it quits. Thanks for joining us on Rise of the GM.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching.